This video is part of the Level 3 Technical Certificate, and in this session we're going to be talking about drainage on a traditional Fourdrinier. This is the traditional Fourdrinier, and there are 3 zones in some literature, 4 zones in other literature. I prefer to divide it into 4 zones. As you can see here, we have the breast roll, here we have the couch roll, and between the two we have the 4 different drainage zones. In zone A, this is known as the blending zone. In this zone, water comes out of the slice onto the forming fabric, lots of water, just a little bit of fibre, and because there's so much water compared to the fibres are very, very free to move around however they wish, and so you're getting this nice blend of fibres and water. Under the wire at that point, you have the forming board and the beginning of the drainage elements. Moving on to the second zone, this zone we call the formation zone. In the formation zone, this is where the sheet begins to be set. Water drains through the wire, assisted by foils. As the water drains through the wire, the fibre to water ratio increases. It becomes more and more difficult for the fibres to move around, and so the sheet begins to be set into its final formation. Therefore we call this a formation zone. Underneath the wire we have traditional vacuums, and maybe towards the end the start of vacuum foils. In the third zone we call this the transition zone. In the transition zone, this is where most of the water is now gone. It's hard for the fibres to move around anymore. But the interesting thing is this is where the wet line occurs, or as some people call it, the dry line. Approaching this section, because there's a lot of water in the sheet, or the forming sheet, you can see a lot of reflection, and so the surface is nice and shiny. Somewhere in this zone, the proportion of water drops so that it becomes an excess of fibres, and therefore you don't get any reflection, and so you get a very dull part of the sheet. So this is called the wet line or the dry line. And the wet line or dry line is a very, very good diagnostic tool. For the same grade of paper running at the same speed, this dry line should be in exactly the same place. If the dry line moves from where it should be, then the operator knows that something has changed. We don't know what, but we know that something has changed. Finally, in the final section, this is the area of high vacuum. So this is where we have the high vacuum boxes. In the first 3 sections, we're just using gravity, really, to help us remove water. But in the final section, in this section D, this is where we're going to have to start paying money to remove water. So we have vacuum pumps attached to these vacuum boxes, and they draw the water through. Finally, when you leave section D, you go over the couch roll. Most mills now have a vacuum couch here, and this vacuum is the last opportunity you have to remove water as cheaply as possible. Typically, going over the couch will remove 1% of the water. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to this, and I hope you'll enjoy the next section equally well.